Hey drifter, I'm glad you made it. Because tonight, we sail to the edge of the world. Oceanus, the ancient stream, where time flows in loops and the stars dip to drink, awaits. This isn't just a story. It's an unbroken flow of calm narration, with no noise, no breaks, and no modern clutter. If you find peace in timeless myths like these, subscribe now and drift with us into a new legend every night. Oceanus was the ancient and mighty Titan god of the vast, earth-encircling river that bore his name. A boundless stream believed to hold all the fresh water of the world within its eternal flow. This endless current was thought to feed every river, well, and spring, and to rise as clouds that brought the rain. His realm was not the salty sea, but the life-giving waters that nourished the earth, and his power extended even to the regulation of the heavenly bodies, which seemed to emerge each day from his depths and sink each night into his embrace. His wife was Tethys, known as the nurse, who was imagined as the one who distributed his waters to all corners of the world through unseen channels beneath the earth. Together, they gave life to their countless children, the Potamoi, who were the gods of rivers, and the Oceanides, the nymphs who dwelled in springs, fountains, and other sources of fresh water. Unlike his brothers among the Titans, Oceanus took no part in the violent act against their father Oceanus, nor did he join the war waged by the Titans against Zeus and the Olympians, choosing instead to remain apart from the strife. In some ancient traditions, he was equated with Ophion, an elder Titan, who in the myths of the Orphic poets ruled briefly over heaven before being overthrown and cast into the flowing waters by Kronos. In art of the ancient world, Oceanus was often shown as a god, with a bull's horns upon his head and the coiling tail of a great fish, a shape that mirrored the forms of his river godsons. He was sometimes shown holding a fish and a serpent, symbols of his dominion. As the centuries passed and Greek knowledge of the world expanded, the image of Oceanus changed. In the Hellenistic age, he was reimagined as the god of the great seas, the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans, which were becoming known to explorers. The old belief in a vast freshwater river encircling the world faded, and in mosaic art of the time he appeared as a sea god, often with crab claw horns, holding a serpent or an oar, and surrounded by fish. Beside him sat Tethys, adorned with small wings on her brow to show her as the mother of the clouds that bring the rain. In the family of the gods, Oceanus was the son of Uranus the sky and Gaia, the earth, and in some accounts of Aether and Gaia. He was the eldest of the Titans, a brother to the others who would later rise against Zeus, yet his choice to remain apart from their rebellion set him apart in nature and in fate. In the oldest tales, he was a power whom even Zeus respected, for in the Homeric poems, he is shown as second to none, but the king of the gods himself. His home was said to lie far to the west, where he and Tethys dwelled in a palace, and it was there that they once cared for Hera, when Zeus was locked in battle with the Titans. In the verses of Hesiod, Oceanus was the father of 3,000 rivers and an equal number of Oceanides, though only the eldest of these nymphs were named. His presence was tied to the sources of the waters of the earth, and his name was invoked as the origin of all flowing streams. His likeness could be found not only in painted pottery, but also on the coins of cities such as Tyre and Alexandria, his form carrying the marks of both his ancient and his later identity. Though his nature changed in the imagination of later ages, in the earliest thought of the Greeks, he was the encircling boundary of the world, the source of all waters, and a god whose quiet strength and far-reaching influence touched the earth, the heavens, and the life of all who lived between them. When the sky and the earth came together in their union, from their meeting were born powerful beings who would shape the earliest world and hold dominion over vast aspects of existence. Among these children of the sky and earth was Oceanus, who emerged from the embrace of Gaia and Oceanus as one of the eldest of the primordial Titans. Alongside him were born Koios, Krios, Hyperion, Apetus, Theia, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, and Tethys, with Kronos coming after them, the youngest among the brothers. These early children of earth and sky formed a generation unlike any other, beings vast and full of hidden knowledge and elemental strength. Their names carried the breath of the cosmos itself, and among them, Oceanus stood out as the embodiment of the swirling, endless river that circled the known world. In another telling, it was recorded that the sons of the sky and earth, the Titans, were named Oceanus, Koios, Hyperion, Krios, Iapetos, and Kronos, and their sisters were called Titanides, known by the names Tethys, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, Dione, and Theia, each one representing a deep and lasting element of the world and its order. Different traditions, passed down by different hands and voices, gave varying details of their origins. Some said they were born from the union of a figure among the Kuretes and a mother named Titaia, from whom their name, Titans, was said to derive. But others stay close to the ancient root, telling again and again how the sky and the earth, in their first union, had given rise to these children of magnitude. 6 brothers and 5 sisters were among them, each with a role to play and a legacy to leave. Oceanus, among the males, was counted with Kronos, Hyperion, Koios, Iapetos, and Krios, while the sisters Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, and Tethys stood beside them. These Titans, it was believed, were not simply mighty in strength, but wise in thought, and each was credited with discovering things that would benefit humankind. Their gifts were many, and their contributions to the world, remembered long after, led to their being honored across generations with lasting fame and reverence. In another record passed down by a Roman voice, the story of their origins was again recalled. From ether and earth came certain abstract forces, and from the sky and the earth, Calum and Terra, were born beings of might and foundation. Among them were Oceanus, Themis, Tartarus, Pontus, Hyperion, and others such as Koios, Kronos, Rhea, Mnemosyne, Dione. Though that version was only partly preserved, its intention remained clear. The birth of the Titans, children of the heavens and the land, was a cornerstone of myth. Among them, Oceanus, the mighty river god, held a place of particular awe, and to him was joined Tethys, his sister and his consort, and from their union came forth a vast lineage that flowed across the world. From their bond were born the rivers, the Potamoi, each one a divine current given name and spirit, many of them known and worshipped across the lands. There was Nilos, whose waters moved through the lands of the south, and Alpheus, who carved his way through rocky lands, and Eridanos swirling deep and full. There was Strymon and Meander, who wandered and curved, and Istros with his fair waters, and Phasis and Rhesos, silver flowing and strong. Achelous moved with a shimmering path, and Nessos with his dark stream, and Rhodios, Heptaporos, Haliacmon. All these were brothers of the waters, born of Oceanus and Tethys, Grenikos and Aispos, Simois, who was like a god, Hermos, Peneos, Kaikos strong in his rush, Sangarios, Ladon, Parthenios, Oenos, Ardeskos, and Scamandros, who was called Holy. Each was a divine current, each a living part of the world's water. But the sons were not alone. From the same deep bond of Oceanus and Tethys came daughters, a different kind of being, but just as divine. These were the Oceanids, gentle and shining, who moved in springs and wells and were guardians of life's flow. Their number was vast, and though many remained unnamed in the tales, some were spoken of with great beauty. Peitho was among them, and Admete, Ianthe, and Electra with her bright spirit. There was Doris and Primno, Orania, whose name reached to the stars, Hippo swift as thought, and Clymene, Rhodaia, Caleroi, Zuxo, Clytia, Idea, and Pasithe. There was Plexora with the waving hair, Galaxora with the light of the sea, lovely Dione, Melibosis, Thoa, and Polydora. These daughters, in many places, cared for the young, and it was said that this role had been given to them by Zeus himself. They walked among the rivers alongside Apollo, guarding and nurturing the next generation across the earth. Thus, from the union of Oceanus and Tethys came a great flow of life, rivers that shaped the lands and nymphs that watched over the waters and the living. In this way, the legacy of the eldest Titan flowed endlessly across the world, remembered in every current and honored in every spring. The daughters of Oceanus and Tethys were many, but among them, the eldest were remembered by name, shining with beauty and divinity, each one a reflection of the vast waters from which they came. There was Circe, called shapely and graceful, whose form was said to have a lovely stature, standing out among her sisters with elegance that mirrored the gentle waves. Ox-eyed Pluto stood beside her, her wide and gleaming eyes said to carry the depths of water's wisdom. Xanthe was there too, her name evoking the golden sparkle of sunlight on river currents, and Arcaste, known for her noble calm. Perseus, radiant and commanding, stood in quiet strength, while Ianeira moved with grace, her presence like a soft breeze on the surface of still waters. Petri was called lovely, her image tied to the solid banks and quiet stones that bordered sacred rivers, and Menesto carried within her a steady, guiding presence. Europa, known in name far and wide, was counted among them, while Métis, a daughter of deep thought and wise counsel, stood with quiet brilliance. Eurynome, who walked in harmony and balance, joined them, followed by Telesto, dressed in saffron robes that glowed like morning light on the waves. Chryseis gleamed with a golden hue, and Asia, her name reaching across distant lands, bore a presence as expansive as her name. Calypso, alluring and secretive, was one of the most captivating, with her mysterious gaze said to mirror hidden currents. Eudora brought gifts, gentle and plentiful, and Tyche was known as the bearer of fortune, her hands forever full of unexpected turns. Amphiro, who stirred the sea into dancing waves, moved beside Oseru, swift and light as the flow of a mountain stream. Yet among them all, none held more eminence than Styx, whose name echoed with power and oaths binding the will of gods themselves. These were only the first of the daughters born to Oceanus and Tethys, yet they were not alone, for their number did not end with a few dozen or even 100. It was told that there were 3,000 of them in all, light-footed and scattered across the earth, daughters of flowing water and gentle rains. These Oceanids, bright among the goddesses, lived not in one place, but across every corner of the land, watching over springs and wells, lakes and rivers, caring for the world with unseen hands. They tended to both the surface and the hidden depths, moving through the flow of life and nurturing what lived beneath their gaze. The vast number of these daughters reflected the endless reach of the waters of Oceanus, who wrapped around the world without rest, his current sleepless and eternal as, in the old tales, even mischievous beings were said to descend from this ancient lineage. The Cercopes, two brothers known across stories for their clever tricks and deceit, were said to have lived upon the earth and practiced all manner of knavery. Their mother, named in some accounts as a daughter of Memnon, was tied by blood to Oceanus and Thea, making the brothers themselves sons of flowing water and divine heritage. Though their ways were crooked, their roots reached back to that deep stream that circled the world, reminding all who heard of them that even from the purest source, chaos might sometimes emerge. The daughters of Oceanus appeared again in other ancient voices. In one tale from the tragedy of Prometheus, they were called the Oceanids, children of Tethys and their father Oceanus, who circled the whole earth in his sleepless current. These daughters stood beside Prometheus as he suffered in silence, and from their lips came words shaped by sorrow and sympathy. The stream of Oceanus, ceaseless and all-embracing, was not only a river of water, but a connection between all living things. And the daughters who flowed from it felt that pull in their hearts. They were called again in verses where they spoke of their home, the banks beside the eternal stream of their father, a place of rest and rhythm that echoed in the words of poets. In the memories of lands and cities, the children of Oceanus and Tethys were honored too. The plains of Thebes, deep and fertile, were said to be nourished by the streams that flowed from their children, among them Dirce, called the most nourishing of all. The waters that flowed through the land were not seen only as gifts of nature, but as the blood of divine beings, and the people who drank from them and tilled their fields beside them gave thanks to the source. The gods of those streams and the daughters who guarded them were part of the very heartbeat of the world. In plays of laughter and song, the presence of Oceanus was felt again. In one ancient comedy, the clouds themselves were called upon to appear, and it was said they might be resting on the snowy heights of Olympus, or perhaps dancing in the gardens of Oceanus, their father, forming sacred choruses with the nymphs. His name, tied to both water and sky, was spoken with awe even in jest, for his role as the father of countless nymphs and spirits remains strong in every telling. Oceanus and Tethys were not forgotten in the writings that sought to record the family trees of the gods. In the accounts of the Titans' children, their daughters were listed clearly: Asia, Styx, Electra, Doris, Eurynome, Amphitrite, and Mete, each one a distinct spirit, each tied to a place, a power, or a principle. These names became part of larger stories, tied to gods and heroes, woven into the fabric of myth, but their beginnings always led back to the stream that never stopped flowing and the nurturing spirit that guided its course. In yet another telling, it was said that one hero of the earth, connected to agriculture and the blessings of the land, was born not from a union of man and woman, but from the meeting of Oceanus and Gaia, of water and earth. This tale, simple yet powerful, reminded listeners that all life comes from such unions, and that even the greatest givers of grain and growth had their origin in the flowing stream and the solid land. When the maiden of the hunt chose her companions, she too looked to the daughters of Oceanus. In one hymn, it was told how Artemis traveled to the mountain of Crete, rich with woods, and then to Oceanus, where she selected nymphs to serve beside her. These girls were all 9 years old, unbound by any duty but the one they freely accepted, and the rivers rejoiced at their going, as did Tethys, proud that her daughters were chosen to walk beside the daughter of Leto. The joy of the river Caeretus was felt deeply, for from his waters came one of the chosen, and even in this the presence of Oceanus and Tethys could be seen. In myth and in memory, through verse and through voice, the children of Oceanus and Tethys moved with grace and purpose, guardians of the world's waters and watchers of its life. Their number, their names, and their deeds were countless, and though only some were remembered by name, all were part of the endless rhythm of water that circled the world and whispered softly through every stream. According to the ancient myths that were passed down through the ages, there came into being many children born from the union of Oceanus and Tethys, children who would one day give their names to the sacred rivers that flow across the lands. And among these river-born sons was Peneus, whose name would later be carried by the flowing waters of Thessaly, known to all as the river Peneus. These river gods, called the Potamoi, were not merely spirits of water, but divine figures given form and presence, born from the endless stream of Oceanus that circled the world in a sleepless current. Diodorus wrote that these sons were numerous, each one tied to a particular river, and among them was also Asopus, another river god whose waters bore his name. Their origin lay not in human ancestry, but in the divine nature of Oceanus and Tethys, whose children spread across the world in countless streams and rushing flows. From Oceanus, it was believed, sprang all rivers, and through his children, the face of the earth was shaped and nourished. Philostratus spoke of the river Meles, who through his son would grant divine titles to other rivers. Peneus would be known as silver-eddied, flowing with glimmering turns. Titaresios would be called nimble and swift, his waters moving with speed and clarity. Enipius would be called divine, for his waters held power and purity. Axios would be named all-beautiful, shining in the eyes of all who looked upon it. And Xanthus would be said to be born from Zeus himself, connecting river to God. Yet above all rivers, Oceanus was remembered as their origin, the fountain from which all waters flowed, his presence behind every stream. In another poetic line, a fountain nymph, one of the daughters of Oceanus, was praised and called the queen of the plantation. Her waters needed to bring life to the land. She was one among many, a stream-born child of Oceanus, and her flowing essence brought growth to the fields and healing to the world. In the records of ancient names passed down by Hyginus, many Oceanids were listed, daughters of Oceanus and Tethys, among them names like Melite, Ianthe, Admete, Stilbo, Pasiphae, Polyxo, Eurynome, and others whose light-footed forms grace springs, wells, and quiet streams. Alongside them were the rivers, their brothers, bearing names known from maps and memory: Strymon, Nile, Euphrates, Tanais, Indus, Cephisus, Ismenus, Axenus, Achelous, Simois, Inachus, Alpheus, Thermodon, Scamander, Tigris, Myander, Orontes, all sons of the same vast source, all flowing with their own strength and beauty. Even in the tales of the Roman poet Ovid, the union of Oceanus and Tethys was remembered. He wrote of gods who loved their sisters, who married within their divine line. As Saturn married Rhea, and Oceanus took Tethys as his wife, their ways were not bound by the rules of mortals, for the gods shaped the world by their own law, and their children bore powers and names that would last through all ages. In another passage, Ovid recalled that Oceanus, whose translucent waters wrapped around the broad earth like a scarf, was once wed to Titan Tethys, and that from them came their daughter Pleione, who herself gave birth to the Pleiades with sky-lifting Atlas. Through this lineage, Oceanus became tied not just to water, but to the stars above, his children rising into the heavens as lights in the night sky. Nonnus, in his great epic, described the lakes called the Limnae as daughters of Oceanus, liquid in form and full of movement. They were said to raise their surfaces, perhaps in greeting or in turmoil, showing that even the stillest waters had life within them. In another tale, when a god brought fire to the river Hydaspes, Oceanus cried out in anger and sorrow, his voice pouring forth in a roar like thunder, his words flowing from his mouth like a great flood. He called out to Tethys, his partner since the world began, his bedmate and equal, the nurse of waters and the mother of countless children. He asked what they were to do, now that even their children were threatened by the burning fury of the gods. He remembered how another of their sons, Asopus, had once been struck down by Zeus in the form of a bird, and now Hydaspes had found a destroyer in Dionysus. The pain of a father echoed in that cry. The sadness of water turned against fire. The sorrow of a stream undone by divine wrath. And still, in another line from the same poet, Oceanus was called loud booming, his voice like thunder over the waters, his form vast and girdled with the unending circle of the world. His presence was not merely of the sea or the stream, but of the boundary itself, the edge of all things where water met sky, and where the world began again. He was the ever-flowing, never-sleeping, deep-sounding father of all rivers, and through his union with Tethys, the waters of the world were born. Their children were not only rivers and nymphs, but symbols of all that flowed and moved, of fortune and mystery, of healing and rage, of beauty and sorrow, tied forever to the endless turning of water upon the land. Their names whispered through fountains and echoed in the crash of waves, their footsteps unseen but felt in every tide and trickling stream, their story held in the rolling rhythm of the rivers that carried life from mountain to sea. Through them, the voice of Oceanus continues to speak, in roaring flood and gentle ripple, telling of ancient beginnings and the endless dance of water and world. The sky, ever turning above the wide world, was led in its endless circle by a god whose waters flowed around the edges of the earth, surrounding everything with his vast and silent current. This god, Oceanus, who was the great stream encircling the land, took in the earliest time as his bride the one who matched him in origin and depth, Tethys, the primeval goddess of the nourishing waters. In this first and ancient union, when no other creatures had yet stirred the quiet stillness of the forming cosmos, the two came together in harmony, joining the ever-flowing waters with the life-giving currents that moved deep below the surface. From this union, the water bridegroom brought forth Clymene, fairest among the naiads, one of the youngest daughters who drew her strength from the soft care of Tethys, who nursed her at her wet breast in the depths where light and sound were distant and gentle. This maiden, with arms as graceful as flowing rivers, was later joined to the bright charioteer of the sky, the one who drove the sun across the heavens. When she was given to him in marriage, the light-footed Horai, the goddesses of the hours and seasons, celebrated her bridal, marking the union of water and flame. Around her, the naiad nymphs danced in circles, rejoicing in the wedding of day and stream, a pairing of light and coolness. In a bower deep with water, yet glowing with warmth, the bride received her shining husband in a union where steam rose from their joining. And in that moment, the voice of Oceanus lifted up, and with every fountain and stream that made up his great being, he sang out in joy beside his partner Tethys. And not only Clymene came from their waters, for the god and goddess who met in the depth of the fountains also gave life to Beroe, a goddess and the soul of a distant city. She was born in Lebanon and moved beside Tethys like a reflection in the waves, called years mate to the older goddess, and was named Amimone by her mother when she was brought into the world beneath the water's surface, born from a bed not of fire or soil, but of deep-running springs. Oceanus, in his bed of many fountains, had poured his life into Tethys once more, and from their mingling came Bero, a child of water, known and worshipped where rivers met the sea and where springs poured out from stone. In the understanding of some, Oceanus was more than a river or a father of rivers. He was the beginning itself. He was sometimes seen as the source from which earth and all the stars had their start, the liquid origin of everything that came to be. In a quiet line from an old poem, this idea was quietly told, that from Oceanus all things were first formed. Even the gods, great and terrible, rose from his waters. Hera herself, in a moment of speech, said she would travel far to the ends of the generous earth, where Oceanus lived, the one from whom all the gods had risen, and to Tethys, her mother, who had taken her in and raised her gently when chaos ruled and fathers were cast down into dark places. She spoke of going to them, to try to end the discord between the old pair, for they had long been separated, no longer sharing their love, with bitterness resting between them. She believed that if she could persuade their hearts to return to each other and to love once more, then she would be cherished by them, remembered forever as the one who healed their rift. Again, she repeated her plan to Zeus, telling him that she intended to go to Oceanus and Tethys, the ones who raised her when she was taken from the side of her mother after the fall of the older gods. She spoke of their long separation, of how the once close deities had turned away from one another and from the gentle bed they once shared. She longed to bring them together again, to mend what time and silence had broken. In another moment, the god of sleep, Hypnos, spoke of his power, saying he could bring rest even to the great stream of Oceanus, who was the source from which all the immortals had come, showing that even the first of beings could be touched by quiet and stillness, and that from the gentle movement of water had come the spark of divine life. In yet another tale, it was said in jest or song that the birds and clouds and strange figures of myth might be found resting or dancing in the realms where Oceanus circled the world, in plays where laughter echoed through ancient theatres. The name of Oceanus was still spoken, for even comedy knew the name of the river that birthed the gods. His name was not only in hymns and solemn stories, but also in the mouths of poets and singers who knew that from his stream came life, time, beauty, and change. And his wife Tethys, though softer in voice and calmer in presence, was no less important, for she nurtured all that was born from his waters, from the rivers to the clouds to the daughters who moved unseen through forests and fountains. Their story, woven through many poems, dramas, and sacred songs, was not only the tale of two ancient beings, but the tale of creation itself, of how the flowing waters that circle the world gave rise to gods, to nymphs, to rivers, to cities, to stars, and to all things that came after. They were the parents of movement, of life, of rhythm and return, and their union, though sometimes troubled, always echoed in the turning of the earth and the flowing of the tide. Though their voices are now quiet, hidden beneath the sound of modern waves and forgotten springs, their presence still surrounds the world, in every drop of water that rolls down a mountain, in every river that winds through the land, in every stream that sings its song beneath the trees. Their love, their discord, their children, their names, they remain in the current, never ceasing, always flowing, always circling the earth just as they did when time itself was still young. The immortals had not always existed, for in the earliest time, before all things, It was not the gods who reigned, but a formless mixture of elements waiting to be shaped. Then came love, Eros, who joined together all the scattered parts of the world, pulling them into union. And from this powerful embrace sprang forth the foundations of all that would come after. It was through this first marriage of opposites, of movement and stillness, of light and shadow, that the great figures of the cosmos emerged. From that union came heaven, the broad sky and earth, the solid base beneath all things. And from those depths also rose water, Oceanus, the encircling stream, ever flowing and without beginning or end. They were not born of other gods, for they were the first. Alongside them arose the blessed, imperishable race of immortals, beings who would shape the world and dwell within it. And so, from flow and union, all things began. Philosophers who studied the nature of being, those who pondered deeply the roots of the cosmos, came to agree that everything came from movement and from the mingling of elements. Even the poets, in both comedy and tragedy, held this truth, and one voice among them quoted a line that said Oceanus was the origin of the gods, and Tethys their mother, confirming that everything, even the heavens, were born from the continuous flow of water and time. In the hymns sung by those who worshipped with song, Oceanus was called upon as the one whose nature forever flowed, the one from whom gods and mortals first arose. He was the stream that encircled all, older than mountains and stars, and in his waters lay the first seeds of life. With him moved Tethys, his equal and eternal mate, ancient as the world, a nurse of the mingling waters, self-born, and gentle mother of many. From her came not only rivers and nymphs, but the nurturing force that sustained them. And in the great conflict that shattered the old order, the war of the Titans, Oceanus did not rise with his brothers. When Earth, in pain and anger, urged her children to rise against their father Sky, it was Oceanus alone who held back, while the others, full of wrath, took up the sickle and struck the heavens. Oceanus remained still, perhaps watching with deep eyes, unwilling to turn against the one from whom all had come. Yet though he did not strike, he did advise his daughter Styx to be the first to stand beside Zeus when the new order rose. At his word, she went to Olympus and pledged her loyalty, and through that choice, she and her children were honored above others. When the Fates first came to Olympus, they did not come alone. The wise Themis was brought from the shining springs of Oceanus, drawn along a gleaming path in a golden chariot to ascend the sacred stair of the gods. There she became the first bride of Zeus, the one who would guide with justice and law, and her presence on Olympus was made possible by the waters of her father's house. It was said too that during the long war, the Titan women, the daughters of earth and sky, had dwelled in the house of Oceanus. Even Hera, long before she became queen of the gods, lived under his roof along with the other goddesses, guarded and raised in the quiet depths of the world, away from the storm of battle that raged between brothers and sons. When Zeus finally struck with fire and fury, punishing the Titans who had torn apart the child Dionysus, Earth herself burned. The trees caught flame, and Gaia's hair, once green and flowing, smoked with pain. Seeing this suffering, Oceanus wept. From his watery eyes poured rivers of tears, a flood that was not only sorrow but a prayer. It was a libation offered in hope that the rage would pass. And when Zeus saw the charred earth, he was moved. The king of the sky, who had scorched the world, now covered the heavens in clouds and let the rain fall. Through this flood, he washed away the ruin and soothed the wounds of the land. And Oceanus, through his tears, had calmed the fury of the storm. In another tale, his quiet influence appeared again. When Prometheus was chained for giving fire to man, it was to the daughters of Oceanus, the Oceanids, that he spoke. And in some versions, it was their father himself who came to speak to Prometheus, offering advice and urging caution. But even when he did not speak, Oceanus remained present, his rivers flowing past the rocks where Prometheus was bound, his streams carrying whispers of ancient truths. He was there before the gods, and he remained even after their battles had scarred the sky and earth. He did not seek thrones or weapons, nor did he claim victory in war. Yet everything that grew, that moved, that lived, had once flowed from him. When the gods rose, they came from his waters. When the world burned, his tears cooled it. When discord ruled, his daughter brought peace. And when the immortal was chained, his streams bore silent witness. In every tale his name circled back, not loud but steady, not flashing like lightning but unbroken like a river that never dries. The poets called him by many names, the philosophers traced their thoughts to him, and even the gods, who claimed the heights of Olympus, owed their beginnings to his flow. Oceanus, the ever-circling, the first of waters, the one who did not rise in wrath, but who endured in quiet, whose voice was a song of fountains and whose legacy was written in every river, spring, and stream that has ever run across the face of the earth. In the old and solemn tragedy passed down from the voice of Aeschylus, there was a moment where Oceanus himself appeared upon the stage, a presence both powerful and gentle, a Titan shaped not by wrath but by loyalty, concern, and restraint. In the great play known as Prometheus Bound, it was not only the daughters of Oceanus, the Oceanids, who watched the chained figure in silence and sorrow, but their father too, who came in person, drawn by kinship and compassion, arriving upon a winged steed that carried him swiftly across the skies from his far home. He came without command, without being summoned, guided only by his own will, stirred not by curiosity, but by a sincere wish to offer comfort. The long journey from the river that bore his name had brought him across the lands and winds, for he could not bear to ignore the fate of one he considered his kin. The sight before him was harsh. Prometheus, bound to the crags of the cold Caucasus Mountains, held fast by chains that cut into his spirit as deeply as they bound his limbs, punished not for failure, but for defiance. Oceanus, old and enduring as the waters that flowed around the world, did not come with pride or fury, but with honest sorrow. He spoke not with judgment, but with calm resolve, saying that no one outside the bond of blood deserved his respect more than Prometheus, and that this visit was not shaped by hollow speeches, but by truth and loyalty. He asked not to watch in pity, but to help, to stand as a friend when none dared approach. Prometheus, however, broken in body yet unyielding in spirit, responded with bitterness and grief. He questioned why Oceanus had left his own peaceful domain, the deeper flowing stream and the cave-roofed homes that bore his name, only to come to this cold land of iron and chains. He asked whether Oceanus had come to witness his misery and add his sorrow to the already heavy weight of Prometheus's fate. There he stood, or rather hung, once a friend of the highest god, one who had aided in building that throne of power, now crushed beneath its heel. His voice was laced with irony, not directed at Oceanus out of hate, but out of the pain of betrayal. Oceanus, undeterred, saw the depth of the punishment and still wished to help, but he gave his counsel gently and with purpose. He told Prometheus that though he was wise and clever, sometimes even the wise must learn to bend. The world had changed, the ruler of the gods was new, and so too must one learn new ways. He warned that such sharp words, though born from truth and rage, could still pierce the ears of the king on high, and if those words reached that throne, the pain Prometheus now suffered could deepen even further. He urged him not to fuel the fire with more defiance, but to cool it, to find a way out through calm and patience rather than fury. These were not the empty words of a coward, but the quiet warnings of one who had seen what proud wrath could earn. He told Prometheus that his suffering came not only from his actions, but from his refusal to yield, from holding his head too high while the storm beat down. Oceanus, ever flowing but never storming, offered himself not only as a visitor, but as an advocate. He said he would leave to see if he could free Prometheus, to speak on his behalf, and to try to soften the hearts that had turned so cold. But he also asked Prometheus to speak more gently, to hold back the thunder in his voice, because sometimes even the strongest must wait for the right tide to rise again. He reminded him that even in wisdom, one could forget that words carried weight, and that sometimes the tongue could bring chains as heavy as iron. But Prometheus, proud in his suffering and unwilling to let go of his fury, replied not with thanks but with envy. He looked at Oceanus, who had escaped punishment despite standing beside him once, and said that it was better for Oceanus to go, to remain free, untouched by the wrath that had fallen upon him. He did not curse him, nor cast him away in hatred, but he wished to bear this alone, to keep his pain from spilling onto others. He had already lost much, and he did not want to be the cause of another's suffering. And so Oceanus, who had journeyed far from his stream, from the river that circled the world, who had come not with pride but with friendship, stood for a moment beside the chained one, offering what he could, his voice, his guidance, his care. Though his words were not accepted as he hoped, and though his counsel was met with bitter defiance, still he had come. He had not forgotten the bond of kinship, nor the pain of those who stood alone. In a world where the old gods were fading and the new gods rose with fire and thunder, Oceanus remained steady, flowing quietly, unchanged in loyalty even as the skies burned and the mountains shook. His daughters formed the chorus, singing and mourning, circling the mountain as their father once circled the world, and in their voices echoed the quiet sorrow and the eternal endurance of the stream that had seen all things begin, and that would see all things pass. Oceanus had spoken not as a warrior or a king, but as a witness, a friend, and a father, his voice rising like a spring through stone, steady, ancient, and deep. And though he returned to his waters, the ripple of his presence remained, carved into the rock and the silence, a quiet reminder that even in the coldest chains, a flowing heart may still reach out with compassion. You may do as you wish, but know that your efforts will not persuade him, for he is not one who bends easily to persuasion. You must be careful not to bring harm upon yourself in your mission, for your intentions, though noble, may be met with wrath rather than mercy. And to this, Oceanus replies with calm resolve, saying that Prometheus is always better at offering advice to others than taking any for himself. He does not rely on rumor or second-hand warnings, but rather on what he has seen and judged with his own mind. So he asks not to be stopped, for his heart is moved with the desire to act, and he is certain, yes, truly confident, that the one who now holds all power in his hands will listen to him and grant him the favor he seeks, the freedom of the one who now suffers in chains. But Prometheus, wise even in agony, responds not with hope but with caution. He tells Oceanus that he needs no teaching, for he already knows the risks, and instead urges him to preserve himself in the way he knows best, while Prometheus himself must endure the weight of his punishment until the ruler above him sets aside his fury. Oceanus then speaks again, offering the thought that words, when used with care, can be like a medicine for a soul that has fallen into disorder. But Prometheus answers that such words only help when they are used at the right moment, not when they are rushed or forced against the swelling tide of rage. For when one tries to calm anger too early or too harshly, it only grows worse. Then Oceanus, still undeterred, asks what harm there could be when zeal is joined with boldness. What danger lies hidden in a heart that burns with the desire to help? And Prometheus, with quiet sharpness, says that such eagerness leads only to wasted effort and foolishness. For to act without wisdom is to lose even the chance of success. Yet Oceanus, still drawn by loyalty, answers that he accepts this risk willingly, and that sometimes it is wiser still to appear a fool than to abandon a friend. Prometheus, resigned, says that if any fault arises from this, it will be his own to bear, not Oceanus's. And Oceanus, now understanding the meaning beneath the words, says that the tone of Prometheus's speech is sending him back home. Prometheus agrees, telling him that it is better this way, so that Oceanus does not bring down hatred upon himself, simply for showing compassion. Oceanus asks if this warning is truly meant for the eyes of the one who now sits on the throne of heaven, and Prometheus replies again to be cautious, lest that throne's occupant turn his anger upon Oceanus too. Oceanus, moved by what he has seen, says that the suffering of Prometheus has taught him much, and so Prometheus urges him once more to leave, to go, and to stay with the decision he now holds. Oceanus nods, saying that the urging of Prometheus matches the eagerness already in his heart, and he prepares to take to the air once more. His winged beast, 4-footed and swift, flaps its great wings to smooth the path of air ahead, and it is true that the creature will be glad to return home, to rest its knees in the familiar stall once more, and so he departs. Far from this moment of sorrow and warning, Oceanus was known by many names in many songs. He was called the Deep-Running One, whose house was at the far edge of the earth, whose waters flowed not in one stream but in a ring that encircled the whole world. In the ancient epic of war, the king of the gods once summoned all the deities to his house, and it was said that no river failed to attend, none but Oceanus, who alone remained apart. His presence was so great, so vast, that even the river Oceanus, mighty and full of power, could not match his strength. His waters ran deep and strong, so deep that all other rivers and even the entire sea were said to have sprung from him. The springs that fed the mountains and the wells that rested in the hearts of valleys all drew from his endless flow. Yet even Oceanus, for all his might and for all his age, was still afraid of the thunderbolt, the sharp and terrible weapon hurled from the sky by the king of the gods. For when that bolt split the heavens with fire and sound, no stream dared resist. And so Oceanus, source of waters, circled the land but never rose in defiance. And beyond the walls and the chains, far in the west, in the place where the world seemed to end, lay the Elysian fields. There, it was said, there was no snow, no storm, no thunder, only gentle winds for the comfort of souls. And these breezes, high singing and soft, were sent forth by Oceanus, whose waters reached even to the edges of paradise. He gave not only rivers and springs, but even the winds that calmed the air and soothed the tired. He was the breath of the west, the peace after the storm, the border beyond which only rest remained. His name, echoed in verse and carved in stone, reminded all that before the gods rose and before the wars were fought, there was water, and that water bore the world. In the memory of poets, philosophers, and singers, Oceanus was not only a titan, not only a river, but a force without end, older than thunder, quieter than war, and deeper than stone. And when he rose into the air to visit the one in chains, he did so not to fight, but to comfort. He offered not weapons, but wisdom, not fire, but flowing patience. His visit, though brief, was a moment where loyalty moved with wings, and where the voice of water tried to soften the fire of punishment. And even when turned away, Oceanus did not leave with bitterness. He left with understanding, his silence not of defeat, but of acceptance. His current flowed back to the edge of the world, steady as ever, watching, remembering, enduring. And in that return, the river once more became the border of all things, the witness to the rise and fall of power, and the quiet breath between the storms. Tethys, the eternal companion of Oceanus, gave birth to the countless rivers known as the Potamoi, swirling and unending, each flowing with the spirit of their divine parentage. These rivers, children of the encircling current of Oceanus, poured across the earth, shaping valleys and mountains, nurturing the soil and carrying life wherever they flowed. Alongside these sons were born the Oceanids, daughters who were gentle guardians of springs, wells, and fountains, watchers of the quiet places where water met stone and where stillness met life. These daughters were not only protectors of the flowing waters, but also caretakers of the unseen depths, standing watch over the unmoving lakes and the deep pools hidden beneath the surface of the world. And behind them all was Oceanus, he who with a sleepless current moved endlessly around the edge of the earth, never resting, never ceasing, always circling, holding everything in the embrace of his waters. In the tales of old, he was the stream without end, the one who flowed around all things, and even the caves with their stone roofs carved into the edges of the world were said to be his own home, hollowed out beside his stream, a place where the deep murmur of water echoed in eternal rhythm. In the mind of ancient philosophers, names were not given lightly, and it was said that those who first named the gods were not simple people, but great thinkers. One such thinker reflected that all things move and nothing remains the same, comparing the world to a river where no one could step into the same stream twice. In this flow, he saw the truth of time and existence, and from that thought, the names Rhea and Kronos were said to come, for they meant flow and time. And so even the oldest of gods were tied to movement. And when Homer said that Oceanus was the origin of the gods and that Tethys was their mother, it was not mere poetry, but a deeper truth. Hesiod too echoed this, and the singer Orpheus said that fair-flowing Oceanus was the first to marry, taking Tethys, his sister and daughter of their mother, as his bride. All these voices came together, from poet to philosopher, to show that water and flow were the first of all things, and from them came the rest of creation. Even in the stars the presence of Oceanus was seen, for it was written that he gave signs at either horn of the sky, east and west, in the constellations that turned endlessly above. As the sky wheeled in its slow, steady course, the stars rising from below came forth through the arms of Oceanus, their movements tied to the rise and fall of his flow. He was not just the waters of the earth, but the silent strength behind the stars and their dance. His role was not only in the rivers and seas, but also in the heavens, where time circled like water, and the sky itself bowed to his rhythm. In the sacred hymns, his name was sung with respect and awe. One hymn, offered with fragrant smoke, called to Oceanus whose nature forever flows, and from whom both gods and mortals first came. He was praised as the incorruptible Father, his waves wrapping around all things, his stream forming the boundary of the earth from which every river, the wide sea, and all pure fountains sprang. He was asked to hear the call, he who brought cleansing and balance even to the divine, he who served as the world's edge and the source of joy. His waves were seen not only as water but as purification, as release, as the force that carried away impurity and returned things to calm. And in another song, even the wild god Pan was honored by Oceanus, who respected his command. Though Pan ran in the woods and Oceanus moved in the deeps, both were part of the same great body, flowing in different forms, but never apart. And in another telling, long after many gods had come and gone, when the sea god Glaucus was transformed, it was Oceanus and Tethys who took away his mortal self. They cleansed him with a song repeated 9 times, a chant that washed away what was once human, purifying him into something divine. It was through their waters, their power, and their ancient voice that transformation came, and the mortal was carried into the realm of the eternal. This act showed that Oceanus was not only the source of physical rivers, but of the spiritual streams that could change the nature of a soul. Oceanus, whose presence stretched through river and sea, cave and sky, field and star, was not a god of war or thunder, not a figure of sharp judgments or loud commands. He was the flow that always moved but never ended, the circle that bound the world in safety and calm. He gave rise to the rivers that fed the land, to the daughters who watched over springs, to the stars that turned above, to the purifying chants that changed fate. Even the gods, with all their strength and fire, looked to him with respect. For while many gods ruled in bursts of power, in lightning and in flame, Oceanus endured without end. His was the soft voice of the current, the deep hum of the tide, the slow turn of stars reflected in still waters. He remained unshaken and vast, while everything else passed by in flashes. And though he did not sit upon Olympus with the others, though he did not raise a hand in battle, his name was the first on many tongues, and his stream was the beginning of the world's breath. From him came the water that fed the roots, the breeze that cooled the west, the stars that returned each night, and the peace that waited at the edge of the world. My sins were heavy, and to be free from their weight, I was commanded to wash myself beneath the torrents of 100 rivers. Without delay, from every direction, waters came rushing, not as small streams, but as overwhelming torrents, crashing down from the mountains, gushing from the valleys, leaping from hidden springs, and flowing as if the very sea had broken loose from its boundaries. They did not come quietly, but poured down upon me like endless waves, covering me completely, flooding over my body and drowning every part of me under their rushing flood. From above and below, from near and far, they joined together in a storm of purification, as if the waters themselves had heard the call and obeyed it. Among them was the source of all water, Oceanus, whose translucent flow wraps around the whole earth like a great shining scarf, gentle and vast, circling endlessly, embracing land and sea alike in his liquid arms. His waters were not only wide but deep with meaning, a boundary for the earth and a source of life, a soft border that touched the clouds and kissed the stars, his flow reflecting the sky like polished glass. Even the gods, who lived in heights far above the mortal world, felt his presence. When one of them returned from the halls of Oceanus, his face was radiant with joy, glowing with the nectar of the deep, for the depths of Oceanus were not only a place of flow and boundary, but also of welcome and celebration. He was a host, ancient and noble, who nourished even the immortals with the gift of his water. But his calm surface could be stirred. When the great deluge came, when Zeus opened the vault of the seven-zoned sky and let the rains fall freely without end, the waters of Oceanus responded. Thunder roared as mountain streams swelled with rage, fountains burst upward into the air, and lakes, the daughters of Oceanus, rose with them. They had once been still and separate, but now they leapt upwards, reconnecting to their father's flow, becoming one with the fury of the storm. The fountains themselves, fed from the deep places where Oceanus runs beneath the surface, began to shoot water high into the air, joining the chaos with strength drawn from his oldest layers. And in the moments of pain and betrayal among the gods, when the bonds of loyalty grew weak and love turned bitter, Oceanus again became a place of refuge. When Hera, wounded in heart, feared being cast out from the heights of heaven for the sake of a mortal rival, she declared that she would leave Olympus. She would go to the farthest edge where Oceanus waits and seek comfort not from thunder or sky, but from Tethys, the primeval mother, and from Oceanus himself. For in the deep places of the world, past the lands of man and God, Oceanus remained, ageless and steady, and to him one could still go when the heavens no longer offered shelter. To abide in his house, even for a goddess, was to return to the beginning, to the oldest hearth, where water and time first met. But even Oceanus, whose flowing arms had embraced the world for ages, whose voice was older than thunder, was not untouched by grief. When the river Eridanus, son of Oceanus, was struck by the bolt of Zeus and burned, it was a sorrow deep enough to stir the wide-flowing one to lament. And when the war god Dionysus set fire to the waters of the river Hydaspes, burning its flow with divine flame, it was more than the loss of a stream. But Oceanus cried out, not softly, but with a roar that could be heard across all shores. His many-throated voice rose like a tide, his words crashing like waves against the land, not made of sound alone but of water and fury. His grief became a deluge, a fountain of sorrow pouring from his everlasting mouth, and he called to Tethys in anguish. She, his equal, his age-mate, his bedmate, the one who shared his origin and bore his children, was the only one to whom he could speak such pain. He named her not only mother of the mingled waters, but the nurse of all that flows, the self-born one who brought life from water. To her he turned, asking what they should do now that their children were attacked by flame, now that even Zeus, once a force of order, had turned fire upon water. He remembered how Asopus, another river, had been struck by Zeus, who came not as himself but as a bird, hiding behind borrowed shape to deliver punishment. And now Hydaspes had faced the same cruelty, this time not from the father, but from the son, a punishment brought in the name of divine war. And in his fury, Oceanus declared that he would rise against it all. No longer would he hold back. He would bring his water against the lightning. He would send flood to swallow flame. He would drown the burning sky. He would silence the thunder with his roar. He would overwhelm the sun with waves. He would quench the fire in its heart. He would drown the stars in his flood. He would wash the moon from the sky, burying her light beneath the foam and surge of his ancient stream. He would rise, not to destroy the world, but to cleanse it of injustice. He who had circled the earth in silence, who had given birth to rivers and nourished gods, would now pour out his grief not as tears but as a tide too vast to be stopped, too deep to be denied, and too old to be ignored. For he was Oceanus, the one who girdled the earth, who watched the stars rise and fall, who sent breezes to the ends of paradise, who remained when all others moved on. His voice was the voice of every river that ever was. His sorrow was the sorrow of every spring, every lake, every stream. And when he cried out, it was not just the sound of loss. It was the roar of a world remembering where it came from and what it had lost. The great circle of the sky trembled as the voice of Oceanus, deep and roaring like 1,000 rivers, rose up in fury, no longer the calm and eternal flow that once wrapped the world in gentle silence. His anger was like a flood, and his words poured out as waves crash upon rocks, unstoppable, wide as the sea. He cried that he would no longer endure the fire that burned his children, nor remain still while the heavens turned against the waters. He declared that he would rise higher than the stars themselves, and with his waters he would wash clean even the dry path of the sky, beginning at the ends of the axle where the great bear turns, scrubbing away the tracks left by the turning wain. He would bring down the stars themselves, beginning with the dolphin, which once swam in his depths before it was lifted into the sky. He would cover it again with seas and let it swim in water, not among the constellations. His wrath reached higher still, for he swore to pull down the fiery river Eridanus from its course in the stars and return it to the world below, to flow not through the sky but through the Celtic lands, where it would again become water and not burning fire. He would empty the sky of the river of flame, restoring its true place in the earth. The starry fishes, high above, would no longer float in the heavens. He would reclaim them, dragging them back into his domain, so they would swim in his seas, not in Olympus. He called upon Tethys to awaken, his ancient partner, his eternal bride, to rise with him and drown the stars themselves in water. His fury would toss even the bull, who once carried Europa across a silent sea, now to be flung on stormy waves, no longer gliding in calm. He mocked the moon, shaped like a horned bull, warning that even she, who drove the night sky in her silver chariot, might tremble to see his own horned form, the image of power rising against her. He would climb into the heights where the stars lived, and there he would pour his flood upon them all. He would soak the proud figure of Cepheus. He would drench the wagoner whose robe would cling to him in wet folds, just as long ago the god of the sea had soaked Ares in the waters around Corinth during a defiant battle. Oceanus would swallow the goat that nursed the infant Zeus, and offer a fitting gift of endless water to the waterman, pouring over him an ocean to match his name. He summoned Tethys and the sea itself to prepare to rise beside him, for he could no longer remain quiet. The thunderbolts of Zeus had given birth to a child in the form of a bull, wild and merciless, who now spread fire and death across the rivers and lands, destroying all without distinction, both guilty and blameless alike. The staff of vine and flame had slain entire peoples, and the torch of wrath had scorched the sacred river Hydaspes. The rivers ran red, the streams boiled with divine fire, and Oceanus, the father of all rivers, could bear it no longer. He let out his rage in a flood of speech, a torrent not of water alone, but of protest and grief, rising from his endless mouth in a sound that shook the shorelines of the world. But in the high place above, the ruler of the sky heard the growing roar. Zeus turned away the wrath of his son, and before the flood of fire and water could meet in destruction, he summoned the clouds and filled the sky with thunder. A single mighty clap cracked across the heavens, stopping Dionysus in his fiery path. The blaze halted, the flames paused, and the storm of Oceanus was stayed. Hera too lifted her voice loud and clear, making a sound that rang through all the air, a cry meant to hold back the burning wrath that threatened to drown the stars and burn the sea. And so the clash was delayed, the flood held in its bed, the fire cooled. Then came Hydaspes, broken and scorched, rising with trembling streams, lifting a wet hand in surrender. He reached out to the god who had burned his waters, no longer proud, no longer defiant, but humbled by fire. He called upon the name of the Father of Hospitality, pleading as a guest before the host, asking for mercy. He admitted his shame not only in pain, but in sorrow, for the waters he now offered to the world were no longer clean. He, once pure, once bright, was now polluted with the blood of war. He could not return to the embrace of Oceanus without guilt, for he had become a river of sorrow, carrying clots of battle instead of life. His voice, bubbling with heat and steam, spoke his apology and his fear. It was not arrogance that drove him to fight, he said, but the fire that was forced upon him, the blaze that turned him from a stream into a weapon. And now, in shame, he begged the fiery god, not for pride, not for victory, but for forgiveness. And above this sorrow, Oceanus remained, the great stream girdled around the edge of the world, flowing not only through the land but beneath the stars. He who bathed the turning point of the sky with his waters had once moved in peace, circling all things with patience. Long ago, he had taken Tethys as his bride in the time before time, their union as old as the earth itself. From their love was born Clymene, fairest of the nymphs, nursed on the breast of Tethys, her arms soft as waves. She was beautiful, and from that beauty came another joining, as the light of the sky was drawn to her and lifted her name among the stars. But even in those quiet days, when rivers flowed gently and the world turned without rage, Oceanus had held the power of all waters. He had cradled the world in his current, watched over the sky from below, and now, when fire and grief burned across his children, he rose again, not with revenge, but with sorrow that could flood the heavens. He was water, he was motion, he was the voice beneath the silence, and when he cried, even the sky paused to listen. His waves were not merely floods of the sea, but memories of creation, and when he moved, the stars themselves trembled. The sun, filled with longing that burned deeper than even the blaze of his own fiery chariot, felt the torch of love stronger than the flames that trailed behind his shining path. As he dipped his golden form into the reddened waters of Oceanus in the east, preparing to rise again at dawn, he saw her, Clymene, playing freely in the cool waters of her father, swimming without care, her form gliding through the waves in playful beauty. The sight pierced his burning heart more fiercely than the light of his own rays. She danced within the very stream that flowed from the encircling arms of Oceanus, the ever-moving father of rivers. And from that moment, the sun no longer shone with calm detachment, for love had caught him. Her father, the ancient river god, saw the truth in the flame-lit gaze of the heavenly charioteer and did not resist the will of the moment. He gave the girl to the sky rider, and the marriage was unlike any other, joining fire and water, passion and peace, in a union witnessed by the rhythm of the turning heavens. The hours, swift and graceful, celebrated the marriage, their light feet dancing in the air, blessing the bridal moment with their sacred pace. Around them, the naiads, daughters of Oceanus, joined in joy, forming circles of celebration as the sea gently stirred around them. A bridal bower of water was prepared, soft and shimmering beneath the heavens, and in this glistening space, the maiden of the river became the bride of flame. She welcomed him into her arms, cooling the fire that had once scorched the sky, and together they formed a bond of life and light. Beside them, Oceanus, ancient and wide, lifted his voice in song, not with words but with the thunderous chorus of fountains, every spring and stream joining to celebrate the joining of his daughter to the sun. From that sacred joining came Phaethon, a child of flame and water, born with brightness in his veins. As soon as he was born, the daughters of Oceanus gathered around him, washing the newborn boy in the very waters that had shaped their own birth, and swaddling him in cloths woven with care and purpose. The stars themselves, those bright wanderers of the sky who knew well the streams of Oceanus, leapt down in glowing joy, surrounding the infant with their familiar light. Selene, the moon herself, came as the goddess of birth, sending down her silver beams to bless the moment of his first breath. The river that had cradled gods now welcomed a child who carried both sky and water in his soul. As the boy grew, Oceanus watched over him with warmth and care. The mighty river god, whose flow girdled the world, played gently with his grandson, lifting him upon his broad midstream belly and tossing him into the air. Again and again he would catch the child, spinning him with the currents, letting him somersault through the mist and splash down into the cool embrace of the river. The boy laughed, unaware of what these games foreshadowed, for each fall was a glimpse of a descent yet to come, and each rise a symbol of the soaring pride that would one day bring him down. Oceanus, the old and wise, saw the truth in the signs. He groaned softly as he watched, not from weariness, but from knowing. The boy's fate had already been whispered through the ripples, and though he longed to speak, he kept his sorrow silent, not wishing to break the joy of the mother who loved too deeply to bear the truth. And Oceanus, ever turning, poured more than rivers into the world. In another time, he sent his stream around the whole earth as the first to bless a newborn city goddess, a child born of law and destined for rule. Around her birth, he wrapped his flowing waters, forming a girdle that touched every land, baptizing her in the currents of origin and justice. From his endless belt of water, he shaped the first message of law, teaching the newborn order through the rhythm of the tide. He had given not just rivers, but the sacred breath of civilization, poured out like a blessing. And when war rose up again, when the gods turned to battle, Oceanus did not remain silent. When the sea itself rumbled and Poseidon called forth his trumpet, leading the rivers to war, Oceanus raised his voice too, not with fire or steel, but with a mighty roar from his endless throat. His was not a cry of rage, but of presence, a sound that shook the waves and told the world that even the river of all rivers would not be absent when the balance of the earth was threatened. He stood with the sea, his body turning like a circle around the earth, a witness and a force, constant, enduring. And in the sky, where constellations move above the world, even there Oceanus left his mark. For when the bear, the great she-beast of stars, was placed among the heavens, it was Oceanus who set the law that she should never set. Tethys, his wife and the fosterer of gods, forbade the bear from dipping her light into the waters of Oceanus. She must circle forever, high in the sky, never touching the boundary where fire meets water. And so, even in the heavens, Oceanus ruled with quiet strength, his waters respected even by the stars. And through it all, Tethys ran beside him, always at his side. From the beginning of time, she had joined him in a union of flowing power. In the hidden places of the world, in beds of many fountains, they had come together, and from their meeting came nymphs and rivers, stars and children, gods and laws. From their love came Clymene, the beautiful, and from Clymene came Phaethon, the shining boy whose fate was marked by light. And through each story, Oceanus turned, not in rage but in rhythm. He turned through joy, through sorrow, through fire, through flood. His stream never ceased, and though gods fought and stars burned, Oceanus flowed around them all, the circle of life and memory. His voice was not a single song, but the chorus of 1,000 fountains, a sound that would never end as long as the rivers reached the sea and the stars watched from above. So the mighty ruler of the sky, in an act of power and divine will, took both the mother and her son and lifted them away from the world of mortals, drawing them upward through the vast emptiness of the heavens, and placed them among the stars, side by side, as two bright constellations, the one known to men as the Great Bear and the other as the Little Bear, forever circling the northern pole of the sky. But when the queen of the gods saw this, her heart burned with rage, for she recognized the shining figures in the sky as those she had once punished. She who had turned the woman into a beast and denied her even the form of humanity, now saw her elevated to the stars, immortalized where all could see. Unable to bear the sight, she descended from the lofty heights of Olympus, riding through the air with her divine chariot, and came down to the deep, to the home of the ancient powers who rule the endless waters. There she found the old gods, the ones older than even the storm-bearing king of Olympus, Tethys, the nurturing mother of rivers, and Oceanus, the great and boundless stream that encircles the world. The gods of the sea, whom all others respected, listened as the queen poured out her bitterness. She told them that she no longer held power, no longer sat alone upon her throne, for another now shared the heavens in her place. And she pointed upward to the pole where the sky turned slowly above the earth, and there, near the axis of the world, shone the twin stars, once mortal, now divine. She asked the sea gods if they did not see the shame in it, if they did not feel insulted by the way this woman, who she had cast down, now rose up higher than her. She said, "I forbade her even the form of a woman, and yet now she stands honored among the stars. Is that how the guilty are punished?" And she pleaded with the sea gods, asking them not to allow the stars that represented this former lover to touch their sacred waters, to keep their oceans pure from the shame she believed the constellations carried. In answer to her fury, the ancient ones nodded in agreement, showing her the reverence she sought. And so she turned again toward the sky, her anger not gone but dulled, and her chariot lifted her back through the air toward her place among the immortals. Oceanus, who was by nature a god of rivers, was later seen by poets and travelers as a god of the salt seas as well. Once explorers sailed beyond the inner waters and reached the outer oceans of the world, he was no longer only the stream of fresh water encircling the known lands, but became the very soul of the vast ocean itself, stretching beyond every horizon. In time, poets equated him with the deep sea, calling him by the name Pontus, and through his waters, he became known not only as a river, but as the ocean that holds all things in its arms. When the islands of the world gathered to honor the gods, it was Delos who always led them, walking before all others into the presence of Oceanus and Tethys, the ancient couple who rule the edge of the world. Behind Delos came other islands, each with their own stories and beauty, but it was Delos who held the honor of being first, perhaps because it had cradled the birth of divine children or held a special place in the songs of the gods. The old poets remembered the Titaness Tethys, wife of Oceanus, not only as the mother of rivers, but as the one who had raised the queen of the gods herself, long before Olympus had become the seat of power. They saw her as a mother figure, bound to her husband in the rolling sea, seething with waves and gulls, a great matron of the deep. And it was she, with her husband, who once stood beside another mortal who had been called to the sea. A man named Glaucus, who had once lived on land, had eaten a plant of power and been changed. He no longer belonged among mortals, and so he came to the sea, seeking a place among the immortals. The sea gods welcomed him warmly, finding something noble in his transformation, and they called forth Tethys and Oceanus to complete his change. With sacred songs sung 9 times in a circle, they washed away his mortal nature. Then they commanded him to dive beneath the waters into the depths of 100 rivers, and as he obeyed, torrents poured down upon him, not just from one place but from all directions, streams, rivers, fountains, and seas joined in a flood of purification. The waters covered him, rushed over his head, and as they did, they removed all that remained of his former life. He emerged no longer mortal, no longer tied to the world of men, but as one of the sea gods, part of the great company that moved through the depths with power and peace. So, Oceanus was not just a river god. He was a presence older than the storm god of Olympus, older than many of the names sung in stories. He was the beginning of water, the father of streams, the boundary of the earth, the circle that turned around the known world. He heard the cries of jealous gods and offered his calm reply. He welcomed the lost and made them whole. He stood with Tethys, ever ancient, ever flowing, and together they ruled a realm that no mountain could hold back and no sky could contain. They were not gods of thunder or fire, not of war or judgment, but of flow and change, of nurturing and cleansing, of turning and returning. Their power was not in striking down, but in surrounding, not in shouts, but in murmurs, not in flames, but in endless motion, and even the stars above knew to keep their place, lest they fall too close to the waters where Oceanus still waits, ever patient, ever circling. So it was that he tried to remember, and though most of what had happened was now hidden from his mind like mist upon the sea, he spoke of what he still held within him, though the rest had been swept away like a dream fading with morning light. He said that when his senses came back, when awareness returned to him after the transformation had taken its course, he found himself to be something altogether new, something no longer like what he had been before. It was as though the shape he had once known had dissolved, and in its place stood a new self, a body transformed, and a mind changed forever. For the first time, he noticed the way his beard had turned a gleaming bronze green, the way it shimmered like sunlight through shallow waters. He saw how his long hair flowed, drifting along the tide as though it had been born from the sea itself. His shoulders had become vast and strong, as broad as the hulls of ships, and his arms, now tinted with the deep hue of the ocean, carried the power of crashing waves. His legs had melted into the form of a great fish's tail, curving beneath him with scales that flashed like the surface of the sea under a clear sky. But even as one voice spoke of change, another voice from long ago had already foretold what would come. For it was once said that a time would arrive far from that moment and far from the age of heroes, when the limits of the world would no longer be known, and the sea itself, the mighty Oceanus, would break open the chains that once held the edges of the earth. Then no longer would the oceans be boundaries, no longer would distant lands be hidden, and Tethys, the ancient mother of waters, would show new places that had never been seen. Even the mysterious land of Thule, once thought to be the final edge of the known world, would no longer be an end, for the world itself would unfold without end. The earth, once believed to be a flat disk encircled by a flowing river, would reveal that it was greater than anyone had ever imagined. Yet before that time, long before men sailed boldly into distant waters, the cosmos had a different shape and the sea had a different meaning. In the beginning, before the age of wanderers and explorers, the world was surrounded by the river Oceanus, a mighty stream that flowed fresh and wide, a vast circle wrapping around the whole of the earth. It was not salt but fresh, and from it came all the waters of the world. It gave birth to the rivers and streams that cut through land, the springs that bubbled up from the earth, and even the clouds that drifted across the sky. These clouds, unseen by mortals in their gathering, would dip beneath the edge of the world and drink from Oceanus before rising again to rain upon the lands. And the Oceanus was not merely a river, but the boundary of the world itself, flowing in a ninefold path around the disk of earth, and beyond its ever-moving waters lay the edge of the heavens, with the sky's great dome touch the rim of the world. Each day, the sun would rise from the waters of Oceanus in the east, casting its golden light across the land, and at evening it would descend again into the western waters, vanishing beneath the waves as though swallowed by the sea. But though it seemed lost, it was not gone, for during the night the sun would sail upon a golden boat, travelling beneath the earth along the northern rim of Oceanus, journeying back to its place of rising. And so too did. The moon and stars follow the same path, rising from and sinking into the waters, part of a rhythm older than time itself. Thus, Oceanus was not just water, but time itself, the eternal movement that marked the days, the passing hours, and the cycles of night and day. Beyond this flowing circle was a land of shadows, a place where darkness clung like a second skin, and there the heavens met the earth at their farthest edge. It was there that the great pit of Tartarus rose from below, forming with the sky dome a vast sphere that enclosed the entire cosmos. The flat earth divided this sphere into two realms, the world above, where gods and mortals dwelled, and the world below, where ancient beings slept and where death made its home. The land of the dead was said to lie at the edge of Oceanus, where the sun never shone and where the waters whispered only to the silence. Within this sacred boundary lived the ancient gods of the river, Oceanus himself, his consort Tethys, and their countless daughters, the Oceanys, each one a spirit of a spring, a cloud, or a flowing river. They were the sources of life's waters, gentle and pure, bringing nourishment to the earth and cleansing to those who wandered lost. The sun god, the dawn, and the moon also had their homes upon the islands that dotted the stream, places hidden from mortal eyes but known to the immortals. These islands floated upon the waters like dreams, distant and unreachable, glowing softly with the light of celestial fire. All rivers were said to trace their beginnings to this stream. Some, like the Nile of the southern lands or the Eridanus of the north, flowed openly from it. Others found their way through secret channels beneath the ground, fed by hidden aquifers that touched the river's flow. Even the rivers of the underworld, such as the Styx, were born from this ancient water. So too did the clouds, unseen as they travelled, rise up after dipping their forms below the horizon, bringing water from Oceanus to fall as rain. And thus, from the earliest memory to the latest prophecy, the river Oceanus remained, circling the world, touching every shore, watching as the heavens turned above it, and the earth spun quietly within. It was both path and prison, both source and end, the flowing breath of the world and the line that no mortal could cross. In his waters, bodies were reborn. In his currents, time moved without rest. And in his embrace, all things flowed, endlessly circling, endlessly returning, as they had from the beginning, and as they would until the end. Ever explain the real shape of the earth, for all place Oceanus at the edge, like a great ring encircling everything, but they do not agree on what lies beyond it. Yet in the oldest stories, in the songs of the poets and the wisdom passed down from the earliest minds, it was always clear that this great river, Oceanus, flowed without end around the circle of the world. Where the stream bends back in a perfect ring, it forms the border of all things, the edge of land, the source of waters, and the place where the sky rests upon the earth. Its power is unmatched, its current deep and never sleeping. For in its flow lies the force that gives rise to every river, every spring, every bubbling well, and even the vast sea itself. From its deep and unbroken waters came the countless streams that cut through earth, and in it all the wells of life find their origin. Even the rain that falls from the heavens finds its birth there, drawn by the winds that carry the moisture gathered from its surface into the clouds. And from this mighty river came many children, for the goddess Tethys bore to Oceanus a great host of sons and daughters. Among the sons were the Potamoi, the rivers of the world, each flowing with purpose, each carrying the blessing of their father's stream. And from the daughters came the Oceanides, a race of light-footed goddesses, gentle and wide-ranging, who moved with grace across the face of the world. There were said to be 3,000 of them, spread far and wide, and each one watched over some sacred spring, some quiet pool, or some still lake. Alongside their brothers, these daughters of Oceanus cared for the land and the depths, guardians of both surface and shadow, and in their care, the young of earth were nurtured and watched over. Everywhere the voice of Oceanus could be felt, even if not always heard. His stream described by the poets as deep running, completely encircling, always flowing. It was said in ancient song that even the river Styx, the dark stream sworn upon by the gods, came from Oceanus, breaking off as a single horn of the great stream and running a path through the underworld in the gloom of night. This stream alone vexed the gods, for its power was unlike any other, and it flowed through a realm far beneath the surface, touched by no sunlight, dark as shadow. And even though Oceanus flowed in 9 great loops around the earth, only one part of it descended into the sea's salt depths. The rest remained fresh and pure, circling endlessly, untouched by the bitterness of the brine. When the poets described the great shield of Heracles, they said that around its edge was crafted the likeness of Oceanus himself, flowing like a flood tide, binding the entire shield together. Upon the waters of that rim, swans flew high, singing songs, while others swam across the surface, scattering the fish below them. Such was the beauty and power of Oceanus, that even in art, he was imagined as a mighty presence, whose waters not only gave life but also held all things in place. Long ago, it was even said that the great ship Argo, carrying its heroes on their quest for the golden treasure, once found its path through Oceanus. Having sailed through the river Phasis and passed through the highlands of the east, the heroes reached the earth-circling stream and followed its flow southward until they came to the Red Sea. There they crossed through Libya and entered once again the sea they had known. Thus, even the farthest journeys were made possible by the pathways of Oceanus, and it was not just the waters of earth that owed their course to Oceanus, for even in the plays and tragedies of old, He was remembered as the one whose sleepless current wrapped around the world, flowing beside the lands of men and gods alike. On the banks of this ceaseless stream, the drama of heaven and earth played out, for Oceanus was always near, watching with calm depth and unending motion. He was called the most nourishing of all rivers, for through the rivers that sprang from him, the land was fed and made fertile. The ancient ones knew that all things returned to him in the end, for nothing could exist without water, and all water came from him. In the comedies too, his presence remained, for even the clouds, light as breath, were said to rest in his gardens, forming dances with the daughters of water. These stories, though light-hearted, still held the same truth, that everything touched by sky or sea was once drawn from the stream of Oceanus. But even in the minds of philosophers and the pens of historians, his place was firm. Though some mocked the old maps that showed the river circling the edge of the earth, none could deny that the idea of such a boundary shaped the ancient world. It was more than geography. It was the vision of a world enclosed, completed, and held safe by the flow of a single, eternal stream. So the image of Oceanus remained, strong and flowing, wrapping the world in his wide embrace. From his waters came the clouds, from his depths came the springs, and from his union with Tethys came the guardians of life's waters. He was the stream that never ceased, the path that carried the sun at night, the border between the known and the unknown. His current touched every land, fed every river, and circled the heavens and the earth. And so, even in silence, he was never still. For where there is movement, where there is water, and where there is time itself, there is Oceanus. Troy continued to echo with the names of the oldest and deepest powers, and among them none flowed more endlessly than the great river Oceanus. It was believed by many, from poets to philosophers, that the entire world was held together by the current of this river, that its waters flowed in a vast, unbroken ring, encircling everything like a girdle of life and motion. Some drew the world like a perfect circle, as if traced by compasses, and always this circle was bordered by Oceanus, the outermost and eternal stream. In their drawings, the lands of Asia and Europe stretched out evenly within this boundary, as if the two halves of the world mirrored each other. Though some, like the old historian, doubted the truth of this view and laughed at its simplicity, still the image of the world encircled by water remained fixed in the minds of many. They spoke of it not with proof, but with the weight of tradition, handed down from the ancient singers and thinkers who shaped the first stories of the world. The Nile, whose waters gave life to the land of Egypt, was sometimes said to rise from this same Oceanus, its mystery traced back to that outer ring. One tale claimed it flowed from the edge of the world, where Oceanus swept around in his endless path. But even this idea was more a marvel than a truth. For the name Oceanus itself, said some, may have been born not from the earth, but from poetry, imagined and given shape by the words of Homer, or even someone older, to serve the song more than the world. Yet whether real or not, this name held power, and its image endured through all the ages of myth and story. Others tried to map the world more carefully, rejecting the neat circle and seeking instead to show the true shapes and spans of land. But still, the idea of Oceanus remained, not as a place to be measured, but as a symbol of the world's farthest edge, the last boundary beyond which no one could go. The old philosopher once spoke of many rivers, mighty and strange, but among them one stood out, the greatest, the outermost, the one that flowed around in a circle. That was Oceanus, and against it, flowing in reverse, ran the shadowy stream of the underworld, Acheron, winding through deserts, passing under the earth, and feeding the lake of the dead. The world, in this vision, was shaped by these great currents, spinning in circles of light and shadow, life and death. In the tales of heroes and the fall of cities, the flow of Oceanus was never far from mind. It was called fathomless, sacred, and ceaseless, tied to the rise and fall of stars and the bounds of the earth itself. It was there in the rush of rivers, in the echoing cries of floods that roared through the hills, in the shield of the warrior who bore the weight of fate. On that shield, among the many wonders, were the arms of Tethys, embracing all in the vast swirl of Oceanus, whose flood poured out across the land, crying with the voices of rivers that ran to every corner. Even the great upheavals that shook heaven and earth, when gods battled giants and the sky trembled, reached to the deep places where Tethys and Oceanus dwelled. The quake touched not only mountain and field, but also the hidden waters below, the deepest streams that whispered beneath the roots of the world. For Oceanus was not only the border of the earth, but also its base, its bedrock, its hidden pulse. From his caverns the rivers were born, from his depths the rain was lifted. The gods of water and sky looked to him as their source, the one who gave motion to the sea and breath to the clouds. So when the ancient world told its stories, whether in songs or in stone, Oceanus was always there, not as a god who walked among men, but as the river that wrapped all things in his circle. From the eastern waves where the sun first leapt into view, to the edge where the stars dipped their fire into the dark, his current carried time itself. His name was written into the shields of heroes, into the speeches of queens, into the prayers of the dead. And no matter how far the maps reached, how wide the world grew, still the image remained. A circle, a stream, a border made of water, and the never-ending flow of Oceanus. When the great god removed himself from the company of the immortals, he journeyed far to the flowing streams of Oceanus and the deep shadowy caves of Tethys. For there at the edge of the world was a place older than the mountains and untouched by the storms of Olympus. Oceanus, whose nature never ceased to flow, was the ancient stream from whom the first of gods and the first of mortals had sprung, the incorruptible Father, whose broad waters wrapped around the earth like a silent guardian, drawing all rivers from his body, spreading the sea from his limbs, and giving birth to fountains that bubbled pure and cold from the earth's surface. He was the end of the land and the source of the waters, the boundary of the pole, the one whose rolling flood marked the final limit of the earth. And to this being, the mystic voices once lifted their hymns, calling him the great purifier of all divine forces, the friendly edge of the world, the fountain from which flowed time itself. Old Oceanus, with arms of liquid grace, embraced the solid land in an eternal dance of movement and stillness, and those who looked upon him saw not only water, but the soul of the cosmos moving with purpose. Far to the north, in places where the sun barely reached and where the sky touched the land, there stood poplar trees whose tears fell like golden droplets, amber stones that glimmered in the dim light. These tear-shaped stones were caught by the clear waters of the distant river Eridanos, which carried them gently past strange and silent lands, and delivered them to the tribes who dwelled near the borderlands of Oceanus. To these peoples, the river was not just a stream, but a message from the rim of the world, from the place where the heavens curved into the sea. Even the old painters, when they sought to depict the world in full upon the shield of the hero, used a single great stream at the rim not a sea, but Oceanus himself, whose slow and steady current marked the outer edge of all things known. It was not merely decoration, but a vision of the world's true boundary, imagined as the continuous ring of the river gods, eternal flow. The daughters of the sea, bright and filled with beauty, danced upon the crests of waves, and as they moved, their steps traced patterns that amazed all who watched. Around them flowed the circular stream of Oceanus, its rhythm soft and ceaseless, its voice murmuring the age-old truths of the earth's edges. It moved not with violence, but with purpose, surrounding the lands that encircled the familiar world, ever flowing yet never breaking its path. Its arms stretched long and wide, folding around the shores in a silent embrace, and where its waves met sand, they left behind their mark, shaping the coasts with each retreat and return. Every grain of sand that touched the water bore witness to the reach of Oceanus, and every step taken upon those sands echoed with the presence of that ancient stream. Even in the stories of those whose strength reshaped the world, the presence of Oceanus was felt. The one whose labors reached every edge of the land had tread where Tethys' far-reaching waters flowed, and all lands touched by those waters bore the mark of his journey. For as the river encircled the globe, so too did the tales of those who had crossed its currents, moving from the known to the unknown. And when the darkness of tragedy cast its shadow upon kingdoms and houses, still the poets recalled that it was Oceanus who enclosed the earth with his waters, imprisoning all things within his ancient flow. From the roots of the mountains to the edges of the horizon, his current was the great circle, tying the four quarters of the earth together like a crown of silver and foam, a coronet around the brow of the world. And when the storm came, when the sky cracked open and the waters were loosed, it was not only the rains that fell, but also the sorrow of the ancient river. Oceanus wept, and his tears became rivers, spilling into every valley, every hollow, and every plain. The fountains swelled, and the mountain streams thundered as his sorrow moved through the world. And when the sky opened fully and the deluge began, when the watery heavens broke their seals and poured their full weight upon the land, it was as if the sevenfold sky itself had been pierced, and all its chambers released. The roars of falling water joined with the voice of Oceanus, and the world was drowned in sound and surge. Mountains became islands, valleys became lakes, and the great stream reclaimed all that had risen above its boundary. The earth that had once stood firm beneath the feet of men now floated like driftwood upon the tide of divine morning, and the river that had always circled the land now swallowed its center, bringing all things back into its embrace. And still, even after the storm passed and the earth breathed again, the shape of the world bore the memory of the river's path. Every map, every myth, every story that sought to explain the world's edge turned once more to the image of Oceanus. He was the ring that held the lands, the path of the stars, the arc of the sun's journey, from the rising of the sun in the east to its fall in the west, from the place where the moon emerged to the place where the stars hid in the morning light. Oceanus remained. He was the stream of beginnings, the river of returns, the border not only of land but of understanding. And though he was rarely worshipped in the way of the other gods, his presence was everywhere, in the springs, in the clouds, in the morning dew and the evening mist. He was in the boundaries that held the sea and the margins that shaped the sky. He was the breath between the stars and the silence between the tides. Oceanus, who flowed when the world began, still flows, unseen but eternal, the oldest memory of the earth, and the last edge of all things. The gulf widened, and the lakes, daughters of the waters, rose from their quiet beds, lifting their shining surfaces toward the light, as if called by a deeper rhythm from beneath the earth. They were the Limnae, cut away from the great and ancient body of Oceanus, yet still bound to him by their birth, by the threads of water that ran beneath soil and stone. And as they lifted, the fountains joined them, rising from the ground with sudden life, shooting upward in spouts of crystal spray. These were not ordinary streams, but channels of Oceanus himself, surging upward with force and clarity, the lower waters finding their voice in the air above, as if the heart of the world had opened and let its pulse be seen. Every drop that rose had travelled the hidden paths of the earth, through caverns and aquifers, through darkness and pressure, until it burst forth in joy, recalling the time when water shaped the world. The rivers, long and winding, owed their life to a single source. The one from whom all their journeys began was the one who encircled the world itself. From the rim of the world he poured his mighty streams, and every river was a thread pulled from the hem of his robe. His name was whispered in the current, felt in the depths, heard in the roar of the waters as they tumbled down from hills and cliffs. He was Oceanus, who spoke not with a single voice, but with the voice of many streams. From his mouth poured not only water but sound, a flood of speech that shook the shores, a roar that rolled across the world like the wind carrying the secrets of ages. And to his partner, his equal, his ancient companion in the shaping of the world, he called. To Tethys, who matched his eternity and shared his flowing nature, he sang of the waters they had mingled, of the children they had brought forth, of the depths they had known. She, who ran beside him, who bore the touch of the sky's circle upon her waves, was the silent force beside his thundering presence, the calm within his storm, the mother who bore spring after spring. Together, they were the beginning. Together, they were the motion beneath the stillness of the earth. And from their union, the waters of life had come, including the gentle one, Clymene, bright among the daughters of springs. She was born of that joining in the deep, of the sky-girdled embrace where the rivers met the stars, and she flowed with the grace of her origin, her voice echoing in wells and brooks. Tethys, forever beside Oceanus, ran with him around the whole of the world, their steps unseen but always felt. In every drop of water, their story lingered, and in every spring, the memory of their love rippled. As Oceanus sent his stream around the loins of the world, he poured it not in force, but in persistence, like a belt of water that never broke, never paused, but circled on. The stream was a boundary and a lifeline, a path that bound the land and sea together, and from its origin came not only the rivers, but the gods themselves. For in a cave where the springs of Oceanus emerged, where the light did not reach but the water did, the first gods had found shelter and beginning. There, in the silent heart of the earth, the god of the forge once fell. Cast down by his own mother for his broken form, he tumbled not into ruin, but into the arms of the daughters of the deep. Eurynome, daughter of Oceanus, and the quiet Thetis, lifted him from the depths and kept him safe, far from the eyes of gods and men. In that hollow cave, surrounded by the constant murmur of the stream that circled the earth, he found a place to work. 9 long years he labored there, shaping wonders from flame and metal, his hands crafting secrets from the silence. None but those who saved him knew where he was, and the world above continued unaware that beneath it, among the waters that never ceased, a god was shaping marvels. The stream of Oceanus, forever circling, was his only witness. its foam and whisper surrounding the cave like a lullaby, its endless motion a reminder that creation and exile could share the same space. And so too did the goddesses dwell there once, during the old war when the world was divided. In that same place, deep at the edge of the world, the daughters of the sky and the mothers of gods found refuge. Hera, Demeter, and Themis all fled to the embrace of Oceanus and Tethys when the heavens trembled. The cave became a cradle not only for water, but for the divine, a place where goddesses could wait, where futures could unfold unseen. Even Hera, raised by Tethys and Oceanus, remembered their care, remembered the home that had sheltered her, the kindness that had grown in the cold of exile. And when she journeyed again to that place, she went not as queen, but as child returning home. For in the ends of the generous earth, where the water met the void, there waited those who had nurtured even the divine. It was there that Oceanus flowed not as a river, but as a presence. His stream bent back in a circle, always returning to itself, always touching the edge it had left. In that motion was eternity. In that circle was the shape of the cosmos, the loop of life and return, of fall and rescue, of silence and song. The cave, with its eternal stream, was more than a place. It was a memory of the beginning, a sanctuary of time, a womb of gods. So the stream flowed on, bending around the earth, never ceasing, never fading. It whispered of ages before names, of forms before flesh, of waters before words. It held the reflections of stars and the roots of mountains. It bore the sighs of springs and the rage of rivers, and through it all, Oceanus remained, girdled by sky, joined to Tethys, father of waters, speaker of floods, the one who flows forever, circling the world with silence, foam, and the heartbeat of beginnings. When the ancient poets sang of the river Oceanus, they were not merely speaking of water, but of the very origin of the gods themselves. For from its endless flowing stream arose the seed of all immortals. Its current moved not just through the physical world, but through the very beginnings of the cosmos, where divine beings found their source and destiny. And so it was that a mortal lost in sorrow wished to be swept away, carried by storm winds through shadowed paths to the place where Oceanus poured backward at the edge of the world, a place beyond mortal sight, as if to vanish into the eternal swirl of his waters, just as once the daughters of a forgotten house were taken by winds and handed to dark spirits who served under the gaze of unpitying fates. Such was the power of the river, that even in dreams and despair, souls were drawn to its edges, yearning for the silence beyond its bend. The fates themselves, riding their chariot of gold, once led Themis from Oceanus's shining spring up the glowing path to the high steps of the heavens, where she would become the first bride to the ruler of the sky, her feet still wet from the sacred flow that gave birth to her wisdom. The caves that bore the river's name were hidden and roofed in rock, shaped by the god himself, places where quiet currents whispered truths older than any word. There, in the beginning of the world, it was said that the serpent lord and his queen, daughter of the deep-flowing river, ruled all things from the cold heights of the mountains. Until they were overthrown and cast down, their reign ended, and their bodies flung into the stream that had once nourished them. Even the goddess of the wild, still a child untouched by age, traveled to the edge of Oceanus to find companions for her hunt, maidens as innocent as the waters they played in, untouched and unbound. The great queen of heaven herself, weary and seeking retreat, spoke of her journey to the farthest limit of the world, where she would rest with Tethys at her hearth, away from all other gods, and dwell in peace near the snake of old waters, far from the quarrels of Olympus. And in the delicate hands of harmony, the rivers themselves were stitched into fine cloth, each with a face like man and horn like bull. And around the edges of the world in that green vision, Oceanus circled as a final thread that closed the tapestry. He did not simply flow. He bound, he framed, he defined. And beyond him, where the sun kissed the sea in its dying light, lay the dark land of the dead. There, in some visions, at the furthest western edge where the river ran beyond sight, was the quiet realm of the departed, though often this place was imagined not beyond, but beneath the world, in the hollow under the feet of all, when souls pale and weightless drifted from the warmth of breath and memory. It was the guide of shadows who led them downward, past the dark and shining streams of Oceanus, beyond the white stone and the silent gates of the sun, through the land where dreams wandered free, until at last they reached the wide fields of Asphodel, where the shapes of the dead moved slowly among the ghostly blooms. This was the river's other role, not just birth, but boundary, not only source, but end. And to reach that place, one had to follow the oldest map of myth, guided by the voices of the gods and the whispers of the deep. The river was not only in the world, it encircled it, touched every shore, wrapped every edge. It was not only water, it was the shape of the world itself, a ring that held everything inside and marked the limit of all that could be known. Even when mortals wished to understand the layout of the world, they imagined it round and rimmed with Oceanus, as if no boundary could exist without his path. His presence was in every fountain, every spring, every sudden stream that leapt from stone, for all were his children, and his daughters, the nymphs of the hidden places, danced over his surface, their laughter mingling with the sound of his endless turning. He was not a river like others, for he did not begin or end. He was always circling, always returning, never ceasing, always murmuring the same truths in 1,000 different voices. He was remembered in fragments and lines, glimpsed in paintings and hymns, named in laments and invocations. Some swore that he gave rise to the gods, others that he stood at the farthest end of all lands, a veil no man could pass. His name was spoken when winds rose and carried mortals to unknown places, when goddesses fled to the edges of time, when heroes stitched the world into pictures of meaning. His stream wound past caves where fire was forged, and into springs where life began. He was the water that moved beneath everything, and above everything, and around everything. He was the silence at the world's end, and the first sound at its beginning. And so, when the poets sang of the river Oceanus, they sang not just of a current, but of a God who encircled all things, who bore within him the past and future, who flowed through memory and myth alike. His waters held the tears of the sky and the laughter of children, the end of kings and the birth of stars. In every corner of the ancient world, his voice could be heard if one listened closely enough. Beneath the bubbling of a spring, the roar of a waterfall, the hush of the sea on a still morning. For he was not just a river, he was the world's edge and its center, the stream that circles everything, the breath between life and death, the name whispered by gods and ghosts alike. You have sailed away from the island of Aiaia, pushed forward by the breath of the wind and the strength of your oars, and now the dark waters of the river Oceanus open before you. The vessel carries you not into the bright heart of the sea, but toward the narrow and hidden strand, that lies at the edge of the known world, a place where the groves belong to the Queen of Shadows, and the air carries no warmth. There, on the very shore of the deep eddying river, you must pull the ship to land, setting its keel into the earth beside the slow-moving current. And from there, you walk by foot toward the chill and damp path that leads into the home of the dead. The ship brought you to the edge of the great stream, to the very place where mist clings to the trees and the wind is still, where there is no day, no light, only the constant grey veil that never lifts. This is the land of the Cimmerians, a people wrapped in endless shadow, whose sky is closed and whose ground is always wet with dew. Never does the sun in all his glory shine his beams on this place. His chariot rolls above but never reaches below. You beach the vessel quietly, for this is no place for noise, and you follow the line of the river Oceanus on foot, hearing nothing but the sound of the stream moving gently alongside you. The way is marked not by road or stone, but by memory and dread, and by the directions given by the sorceress who sent you there. You walk past the twisted roots and damp soil until you come to the place she described, where the earth is thin and the world below is near. And when at last the journey beneath is done, when the shades have been seen and the rites have been fulfilled, you return again to the ship and find your companions waiting, ready to row. One by one they take their places along the benches, and again the oars reach out and cut into the water. At first you row, pulling yourselves back along the path, past the place of groves and grey shores, and then the wind takes you, lifting your ship forward, guiding you away from the dread passage and toward the familiar. The river Oceanus gives way to the sea, its waters opening wide once again, and your vessel moves from its current to the vast waves of the open sea, leading you back at last to the island from which you came. And so, the voyage over the river ends. The journey across Oceanus was never one of mere distance, but of leaving the world of the living and entering the space where death resides. For among all rivers, Oceanus is the first and the greatest, the one that cannot be crossed by foot, the one that lies between what is and what was. It is not a river like those that run through cities or mountains. It is a boundary, a border, a flowing edge around the world. It circles everything and touches all things. It cannot be walked over. Only those who possess a ship and the courage to steer it may pass. It is the first stream you meet and the last one you leave behind. Beneath the wide pathways of the earth, it flows still, joined by other waters, joined even by the Styx, which is a part of its own body, a single horn drawn from the great river, branching off and running through the blackness of night. This branch flows deep under the earth, traveling in its course through the hidden spaces below the surface, and in its journey it becomes a thing of dread, even to the gods. The water of the Styx is only a small part of the whole, only 1/10 of the total flow, but it carries the weight of oaths and the fear of divine punishment. The rest of Oceanus, with its silver swirling waters, runs in great arcs, looping 9 times around the edges of the world, curling around the ridges of the sea, flowing onward into the wide salt waters that fill the deep basins. He does not end where the land ends, but continues around it, always circling, always enclosing. Where the land falls away into mystery, Oceanus remains. He is the stream that marks where light fails and darkness begins. He is the first river to appear on maps and the last to be forgotten in tales. The waters of Oceanus do not rush or crash, but move with an endless rhythm, always turning, always enclosing, always watching the rise and fall of gods and mortals alike. And when you reach his banks, you know you have reached the edge of the world, for beyond him lies nothing but silence and shadow.